So today we're looking at faith, we're looking at Isaac, we're looking at Jacob, and we're looking at Joseph. Men who had confidence in God, who lived that confidence out in obedience. And as we do this, I want to tell you, I've got 2 main points, and we're going all over the place, but we're just going to keep going back to these 2 main points. And the 2 main points are this. 1, faith sees beyond. Faith, now you probably say, that's very obvious. And it is very obvious. But it is what the passage is talking about. And sometimes we need to go back to the obvious and just rethink it again and examine it again and just be refreshed by it again. Faith sees beyond. It sees beyond the here and now. It sees beyond our lives and our plans and ourselves. Faith does that. Because we can, naturally, on our own, just be completely obsessed with our lives and our plans and ourselves. But faith goes way beyond that. And then faith also does this, and this might take a little bit of explaining, and hopefully I won't make it so complicated that I don't even understand it myself when I come away from it. Anyway, the thing is this. Faith enables us to live with a lighter grip on life. Faith enables us to live with a lighter grip on life. Let me ask you this question. How tight are you holding on to life? How tight are you holding on to, let's put it this way, this world? Would you like to answer that question publicly? I don't know if I would. How tight are you holding on? Imagine you're a child again. All right, let's knock off the decades and go back to 6 or 7. What's a good age? Probably 6, just before you lose your baby teeth, because that means you can still eat lots of sweets and you don't have to worry about your adult teeth. So we'll say about 6. And you rush into a playground. And at 6, you have mountains of energy, don't you? Probably right now you're thinking, oh, I wish I had mountains of energy. 6 years old, you go into a playground, you want to go on everything. So let's just imagine that. You go on the roundabout and the swings, and you go on the climbing frame. And I don't know about you, they certainly have better playgrounds nowadays than they used to have when I was a kid. The seesaw was about the most exciting thing going. Anyway, imagine all that. You've got this bundle of energy, and you're running into the playground. And eventually, having gone on everything else, you go onto the monkey bars. Now, I don't know if you were a fearless little kid or whether you were one of these ones that were always sort of scared of the next thing. But imagine, for this as illustration, you're one of those fearless kids. And you jump onto the monkey bars, and you swing from monkey bar to monkey bar. And it's about, I don't know, it's about 6 feet off the ground, maybe a little bit more. And it's about 3 meters across, and you're swinging with ease across from one side to the other. And it's not too much of a struggle. And when you look down, at 6 or 7, you look down, and it's probably 2, 3, maybe 4 feet from the ground. And if you're one of those fearless kids, well, 3 feet, 4 feet is nothing. And you swing across there with absolute ease. And you're confident that if you lose your grip, you drop off and you land safely on the ground. Maybe a little bit of a bump, but at the end of the day, you land safely on the ground. Now, when you're just 2, 3 feet off that climbing frame, it's easy, and you feel safe. And you know if you fall safely to the ground. But imagine that climbing frame, those monkey bars that you go on. Instead of just being 6, 7 feet off the ground, you climb up, and it's thousands and thousands of steps. And it goes higher and higher and higher. And eventually you are up in the clouds. Now, as a 6 and 7-year-old, you probably wouldn't feel all the danger of that. You might. But then imagine you're swinging from side to side. You hold on a lot tighter when you are thousands of feet up in the air, don't you? When you can see clouds below you and in the distance some grass and ground, you hold those monkey bars a lot tighter when you know that you are in mortal danger. When you know that if you fall off, you die, you hold the monkey bars a lot tighter. Now, in that situation, you probably would look at those monkey bars and you would just never go up there. But if you did go up there, you would make sure you held on as tightly as you could, because it's no longer any fun. It is now a quite frightening experience. The man and woman of faith knows that there is a God there, and knows that when they fall, they only fall 2 or 3 feet before the arms of that God are underneath them. One of the key lessons from these verses, from the lives of Isaac and Jacob and Joseph, is that we don't need to hold on too tight to this world and the things of this world, because falling off doesn't actually cost us very much at all. It's no real big deal. It is a massive deal if you fall from thousands of feet. It's no real big deal if you fall from 2 or 3 feet. You might just scuff your knee or something if you fall awkwardly. In the cases of Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, we read these verses. Now, the whole life story of these 3 characters is summed up. They get 1 verse each. The writer of Hebrews is a bit stingy there. I think that's all he needed. 1 verse each. And do you notice that as he sums up their lives, he doesn't go through the actions that they lived, the way that they lived. He only really talks about their final hours, their final requests. And you think, hold on a second, just think about that for a moment. These characters lived, especially Joseph, he lived an incredible life. To be the favored son, then to be the slave, then to go to prison, and then to be the ruler of Egypt, interpreting the dreams and saving his own people and the nation of Egypt from famine. And yet, in all of that, he showed great faith. When he was in prison, did he turn around, shake his fist at God and say, what am I doing here? Why have you put me in this mess? He just kind of held true. He carried on faithfully doing his work. Now, you could say the life story of these characters shows incredible faith. But none of that is what the writer of Hebrews talks about. He just focuses on the final acts, the final chapters, the final moments of these people's lives. What is going on? Why does the writer of Hebrews draw attention to these final days and their final actions, their final words? Why? Because I think these men, right at the close of their lives, because this is what it says in verse 21, Jacob, when he was dying, Joseph, when the end was near, in verse 22, they looked beyond their here and now of their lives and their situations. They saw what was still to come, and they embraced it. They welcomed it. They saw it and beyond. It wasn't just that they lived by faith. Hebrews 11, these verses are telling us. It wasn't just that they lived by faith. It's that they could go from this world, from beyond their own lives, knowing that, as it were, they would land safely, that God had everything planned and sorted out, that he was there underneath pinning everything together. And as their time finished, they looked beyond. If you've got your Bible open, Hebrews 11, verse 13, just have a look at that. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. It's saying they really didn't see fulfillment. But right there at the end of their lives, they could look beyond their situation and they could see God in action and they could see God doing, and they were holding on to those promises. Just go quickly through. Isaac, first of all. You familiar with the life story of Isaac? Yeah. Abraham gets, I think, something like 12 chapters, maybe 14 chapters. Isaac only gets one chapter in Genesis. Anyway, he only gets 1 verse in Hebrews. By faith, it says, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. In regard to their future. If you go back to the story, what you see is this. Isaac, his story is just 1 chapter, 26 in Genesis, although he's mentioned in others. Isaac and his wife Rebekah are childless. They pray for a child, and the Lord tells them they're going to have twins in Genesis 25. And the Lord says there are 2 nations in your womb, he says to Rebekah. And then at the same time, he says this. He says, the elder will serve the younger. In other words, Esau will serve Jacob. And Rebekah is told that. And Isaac, we believe, knows that. And yet, in Isaac's life story, it seems, you might think I'm wrong, but it seems that Isaac resists that, and he favors Esau above Jacob, even though he is told that the older Esau will serve the younger Jacob. Isaac favors Jacob. And his reasoning is not anything spiritual, it's completely carnal. Esau is a great hunter. He brings in some very nice meat, and Isaac loves a burger and a steak or whatever it is. So his reasoning is very simple. You know, Esau puts on a good barbecue. But then right at the end of his life, Isaac, whose eyes are dim, and sometimes in the Bible when it talks about the physical state of a person, it's also kind of illustrating the spiritual state of that person. His eyes are dim, he's old and he's frail. And Jacob and Esau have had this sort of contention all through their lives. And Jacob steps in to steal the blessing from Esau. He's already had the birthright, as it were, and messed around with that. And now he steps in and he takes the blessing from Esau. So he goes into his father, pretending to be Esau, and dressed as Esau, and even smelling as Esau, and providing food that Esau would provide. He steals away his brother's blessing. Esau finds out and is furious. What is interesting is when Isaac finds out, he's not furious. You know what he does? In chapter 28 of Genesis, he kind of, when he finds out, and I don't know about you, if my son had cheated me in that sort of way and been so sneaky and all the rest of it, I would have lost it. I would have been furious. But in Genesis 28, Isaac responds by reconfirming the blessing that he gave to Jacob. Instead of taking it all back and saying, you cheated me, he confirms it. And in fact, to Esau, he offers him very little in the shape of a blessing. What has happened right at the end of Isaac's life? All through his life, he has favored Esau. And then right there at the end, I think he has seen God's promise is going to be fulfilled in Jacob, not Esau. And right there at the end, he's recognized this. What his wife told him at the beginning when he said that when she was told by the Lord that the elder will serve the younger, Isaac kind of saw it. Right there at the end. And he made a promise. He made a blessing. As it says, by faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. In other words, he saw the future of Jacob and he blessed him, seeing that God was going to be using Jacob. That the line was going through, the promise that was given to Abraham was going to go through Jacob. And he blessed Jacob with that in mind. And he blessed Esau with something else in mind. Then you go on. That's kind of the story of Isaac. Then you go on to Jacob. What a man. What a twisted little character. And yet God turns him into Israel, doesn't he? And that's where we get God's people. Although it's very interesting, isn't it? Jacob gets his name changed. But how often is he still referred to as Jacob over and over again? His old character is there for everyone to see. Anyway, Jacob, it says this. If you've got your Bibles, verse 22. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons. And then it goes, and worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. Do you get the picture? An old man leaning on the top of his staff. And this other, there's two instances here. And they are actually a bit of time apart. The first is Jacob blessing his grandchildren, the children of Joseph. Joseph have Ephraim, the youngest, and Manasseh, the oldest. And what Jacob does is he gives them the major blessing, as it were, to Ephraim, the youngest, kind of copying what he himself had experienced. But the Bible says that he's seeing beyond. If you look at the verses in Genesis, he is seeing beyond, and he's seeing that God is going to bless Ephraim. And actually, he's not going to bless in the same way Manasseh. So it's spoken into that blessing that he gives those two children. What is Jacob doing? He's just seeing beyond. And then what else does he do? He leans on this staff. This is a picture of what happened in Genesis 47. Joseph greets Jacob as he enters for the first time Egypt, which is going to be their new home. And what happens is Joseph, as it were, is leaning on his staff, and Jacob is leaning on his staff, and Joseph is kind of showing him this is Egypt. And at that point, Jacob says to Joseph, I want you to promise me that you bury me back at home with my family, with my relatives. So he's saying, yeah, I am here now, but you make sure you take me back home. And Jacob says that right at the end of his life. And again, that is a picture of the faith of the man, seeing beyond and saying, I need to be back there. And then Joseph, oh, come on, we all know the story of Joseph, the Technicolor Dreamcoat. I mean, what verse is that in the Bible? But anyway, the story of Joseph. What did Joseph do right at the end of his life? It says here in verse 22, by faith, Joseph, when his end was near, he did two things. One, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. Now, you can read that and you think, well, I know all that. He did two things. He spoke about the exodus. God had given Abraham a promise. And it was that his people were going to have that land back in Israel, Canaan, that land. And Isaac and Jacob and now Joseph are linked into that promise. Now, Joseph could have said, look, things are good for us in Egypt here. I am a powerful man in Egypt here. I've got this land, I've got position, I've got recognition. You guys, you stay here with me. It's going to be good for us here. But all credit to Joseph, he didn't do that. Instead, he holds on to God's promises that was given to his great-granddad Abraham, and he holds on to that. So he's so much so, he says to these people, surely, in Genesis 50, surely God is going to provide. He's going to be an exodus. And when he does, I want you to make sure that you take my bones and you bury them back there. So that's what they did. They embalmed Joseph's body. They wrapped him all up and they had him in a coffin sitting there and waiting. 430 years. I mean, that's the longest funeral ever. You think about that. You ever gone to a funeral and you think, oh, it's weeks before they... 430 years. And then what do? They bury him back in Shechem in the days of Joshua. What was Joseph doing? He was saying, I don't need to be connected to this world. I need to be connected to the promises God has given me. My view isn't here, although things look pretty good here. My view is beyond all this. So to sum up, I've got to be honest, I'm saying sum up there, and a lot of people think, oh, great, he's finishing off. But I have another sum up later. So sorry about that. To sum up, Isaac, Jacob, and I think especially Joseph, had faith. They saw beyond the here and now, beyond themselves and their own plans and their own lives. And they also were enabled to have a lighter grip on life because they saw beyond. I love the story of the elderly woman. We've probably said this before. The elderly woman who was buried with her pudding spoon. You know this story? Elderly woman buried with a pudding spoon. She goes along to a church meal week after week. And she notices, I think the story goes like this, she notices that some days you just get a knife and fork, and some days you get a knife, a fork, and a spoon. And she knows on the days you get a spoon, you get a pudding. So when she talks to the vicar at the church, she says, I want to be buried with a pudding spoon in my hand. And the vicar, what are you about, buried with a pudding spoon in your hand? She said, I know when I have the pudding spoon that the best is yet to come, you see. And that's a kind of lovely, I don't know if she said exactly those words, but it's that kind of mentality. The Christian should have, as it were, in their hand all their time, a figurative pudding spoon, where we know the best is yet to come. And it means we can have a lighter hold on this world and everything this world offers. It puts a completely different perspective on what we own and what we have and how we live, because we are always looking beyond. Does the writer of Hebrews point out how they lived their lives? No. Does he give you the details of what they did all through their lives? No. He just takes you to the final chapter, the closing moments, because that sums up the way that they lived the rest of their lives, looking beyond and having a light grip on life. For many people, they have nothing to hold on to. They have to grip this life tightly, because like being on the monkey bars thousands of feet up, they fall to, as it were, abyss below. Bertrand Russell, he kind of summed up in his mind the human situation. He talked about life as saying that we're the product of random chance, that nothing we can do really matters. And when everything is finished off, well, it's all worthless and nothing. And then he finished his little quote about that. And you can go on to Google and just type in Bertrand Russell and despair. And you can read his quote. And at the end of his little paragraph of thoughts about this world, he says this: only on the firm foundation of unyielding despair can the soul's inhabitation henceforth be safely built. He's saying the only safe foundation for life and everything for the soul is unyielding despair. And yet the Christian can say that isn't true. There is a foundation for our soul. There is a beyond. And God has done all these things to put it into place. And as men and women of faith, we can live in this life with actually a very light grip on what we own, on the way we are, on what matters to us. We can have a light grip. We can give things up easily, because actually what really matters is beyond. I wish I'd learned this lesson earlier. You know, the number of times I was at work arguing over car parking spaces and holiday allowance. And I think, I wish I'd had a lighter grip on what goes on in this world. But that's where these things, that's where the rubber hits the road. You and me in life can have a lighter grip on so many things because we are looking beyond. I think Dorothy Harmon, who you probably don't know, would completely disagree with Bertrand Russell. Dorothy Harmon was an elderly lady in my last church. She was diagnosed with cancer. She got it in her liver, and she was literally given weeks to live. I offered to pop round to see her, and she said, I'd love you to come. Well, she didn't say that. Somebody who shared a house with her said, so I went. Now, I was fully expecting to see somebody really at the last verges of life, just, gasping. But she was not like that at all. She spoke with absolute and complete confidence. She encouraged me to live my life for God, to use the gifts and abilities and every bit of life I had for God. I can't remember seeing anybody so joyful and confident, with also a sense of urgency in her last moments on life. She kind of chatted to me with a fervent energy for about 5 minutes, and then she just flopped. And then I left. And within a few days, she was gone. What was she desperate to do? She was right at the finishing tape, and she was just desperate to tell everybody that she met just to keep running, to keep your eyes on what was there. So looking at these verses, are we really, if we're honest with ourselves, are we really looking beyond? Are you? Or actually, is the next thing on your calendar, so, or the next event that you've got, so in your, or are you looking beyond? And then does your faith in Jesus Christ mean that you actually have a very light grip on life, on the things that you own, on the way you give yourself, on the things that you do? Or actually, are you still just as greedy and as grasping and as self-focused as everybody else? Because sometimes the attitude of the world around us can rub off on us when we are meant to be the people looking beyond. So let me leave you with that question. The man and woman of faith knows that God is there. And if we fall, we only fall a little bit. before he catches us with his arms around us. We need, like these examples in Hebrews 11, to have confidence in God that leads to obedience to God. And a lot of Christians have confidence in God, but don't like to engage with the idea of obedience to God. Let's make sure that our faith has a real impact on the way we live our lives.